If you were to design a machine, a machine specifically engineered to induce anxiety in the human brain, you really couldn't do much better than the modern news cycle.
Oh, absolutely. It's a perfect storm.
You open your phone, right,
Yeah.
and it's just a constant ticker tape of disaster. You've got terrorist attacks, civil wars, school shootings, crime rates going up. It really feels like entropy is winning.
It does. It feels like the fabric of civilization is, fraying at the edges.
Yeah,
And if you ask people, and pollsters do this constantly, they ask, is the world getting safer or is it getting more dangerous?
and the answer is always more dangerous.
Almost unanimous. People are convinced, absolutely convinced, that we are living in the most violent era in human history.
But that's why we're here today, because we have this stack of research on the desk that suggests our intuition isn't just a little bit off.
No, it's not just off.
It is basically inversely correlated with reality. We're looking at Steven Pinker's monumental work, The Better Angels of Our Nature. And his thesis is, well, it's one of those ideas that once you really see the data, it completely rewires how you view the world.
It really is. Pinker himself calls it the most important thing that has ever happened to our species.
That's a huge claim.
It is, but he backs it up. His core argument is that violence, despite our feelings, has been declining over long, long stretches of time. And today, right now, we may be living in the most peaceable era in our species' existence.
Okay, so I can already hear the listeners just rolling their eyes. Tell that to the people in a war zone right now. It sounds like a delusion.
Or worse, a kind of callous privilege.
Right. But this deep dive today isn't about dismissing current suffering. It's not about saying everything is perfect. It's about context. This book is an absolute beast. It's, 800 pages?
Over 800, yeah. It's history, neuroscience, statistics, game theory.
It's everything.
And that's what makes it so convincing. He doesn't just cherry pick a few good years. He zooms the camera way out. We're talking millennia.
He's looking at the big picture.
The biggest picture. He looks at how likely you were to be murdered in a hunter-gatherer tribe versus a medieval city versus, say, modern-day London. And the drop-off isn't subtle. It's like a fractally collapsing curve. It just goes down and down and down.
But before we get to the graphs,
Yeah.
and believe me, we have a lot of graphs to cover, we have to tackle that elephant in the room. Why doesn't it feel like violence is dropping? Why does it feel so viscerally like the world is on fire?
That is the availability heuristic. It's a glitch in our mental operating system. It's a cognitive bias.
Okay, break that down.
Well, our brains estimate the probability of something happening based on how easily we can recall examples of it.
Right, and nothing is easier to recall than a bloody headline or a shocking video on the news.
Exactly. It's the old newsroom adage. If it bleeds, it leads. Violence is an event. It happens at a specific time, a specific place. You can film it. Peace, on the other hand,
Is a non-event.
it's the absence of violence. It's the dogs that didn't bark. You never see a breaking news alert on your phone that says, correction, 7.8 billion people were pretty kind to each other today.
So it's almost a paradox. The better our media gets at delivering news from every single corner of the globe, instantly,
The more violent the world seems.
even if the actual rate, the statistical probability of you being a victim, is dropping.
Precisely. Pinker has this great thought experiment. Imagine the rate of violence drops by half a huge achievement. But in that same period, the number of news cameras in the world doubles. What's the impression?
That things are just as bad as they always were, or worse.
You'd think violence has stayed the same. We're suffering from better reporting. So our mission for this deep dive is to, turn off the 24-hour news feed for a bit and look at the trend lines. We need to go back, way, way back, to establish a baseline for what human life was actually like.
And Pinker calls this section of the book the sanity check. Because we have this deeply romanticized notion of the past, don't we?
Oh, completely. The noble savage.
The idea that before capitalism, before states, before all the corruption of modern society, humans lived in this beautiful harmony with nature and each other.
It's Rousseau's fantasy, really. The idea that civilization is the disease and the state of nature was some kind of Eden.
Right. But when you actually look at the archaeological record, that fantasy it completely falls apart.
Right.
We need to take a trip to what Pinker calls the foreign country of the past. And frankly, it's a terrifying place to visit.
It is a horror show. There's no other way to put it.
So let's start with the cold, hard evidence. And I mean literally cold. Let's talk about Ötzi the Iceman.
Ötzi, yes. This is one of the most fascinating cold cases pun very much intended, in all of history. So for context, it's 1991. Some hikers are up in the Tyrolean Alps on the border of Austria and Italy.
And they just stumble upon a body melting out of the glacier?
Exactly, and he's incredibly well preserved because of the ox, the skin, the hair, the organs, it's all there.
And at first, the authorities think this is a modern hiker, don't they?
Yeah.
Maybe some poor guy who got lost in a storm 20, 30 years ago.
That was the assumption. They're actually handling him pretty roughly. They're trying to jackhammer him out of the ice, which makes archaeologists cringe today.
Oh, wow.
But once they get him down to a lab in Innsbruck, they realize his gear is, well, it's all wrong. He's got a copper axe, he's wearing leggings made of goatskin, and a cap made of bearskin. This
Yeah.
isn't a modern tourist.
Ah.
This man is 5,300 years old.
From the Neolithic era, the late Stone Age.
And for a decade, the story they told was that he got caught in a sudden snowstorm, lay down in a gully to rest, and just froze to death. A tragic, natural death.
That was the accepted narrative.
That was the story. Until about 10 years later, when radiologic technology had improved significantly, they put Ötzi through a modern CT scanner and they found it.
The arrowhead.
A small flint arrowhead buried deep in his left shoulder, hidden behind the clavicle.
So he wasn't lost, he was shot.
He was shot from behind. The arrow tore through his back and severed the subclavian artery. He would have bled out in minutes. But, it gets so much darker when you look at the rest of the forensics. This was not a random mugging.
This is the part of the book that just blew my mind. They started analyzing the DNA on his gear.
Right. It's like a prehistoric CSI episode. On his knife, this little flint dagger, they found the blood of one other person.
Okay.
On his arrowheads, the ones he still had in his quiver, they found the blood of 2 other people.
2 more people, so that's 3.
3. And then on his coat, this long coat made of animal hide, they found the blood of a 4th person.
4 different people.
Yeah.
So reconstruct that day for us. What on earth was Ötzi doing up in the mountains?
The forensic reconstruction suggests is that Ötzi was involved in a massive running battle, a skirmish, a feud, a raid, whatever you want to call it. He shot 2 people with his bow, and crucially, he managed to retrieve his arrows, which were valuable.
Which means he either advanced on them to pull the arrows out, or he pulled them out of their dead bodies.
Exactly. He also stabbed a 3rd person hand-to-hand with his knife. He was carrying a wounded comrade on his back at some point. That's probably the blood on the coat. And then finally, as he was fleeing up into the mountains, someone caught him from behind with that final, fatal arrow.
This just completely shatters that image of the peaceful prehistoric shepherd. This paints a picture of a world of constant lethal raiding.
And that's the key. Ötzi isn't some weird anomaly. When archaeologists look at prehistoric skeletons from sites all over the world, the percentage that show clear signs of violent trauma, blunt force trauma to the skull, projectile wounds, it's shocking.
How high are we talking?
In some burial sites, it's up to 60% of the male skeletons that have healed or unhealed skull fractures.
60%. That's unbelievable.
It varies, of course, from site to site, but the average rate of death from violence across these pre-state hunter-gatherer or horticultural societies is astronomically higher than today. Pinker does the math. If the United States today had the same homicide rate as an average non-state society.
How many murders would we have? It's around 15,000 a year now, right?
Something like that. Well, if we had their rate, we wouldn't have 15,000 murders a year. We would have nearly 2 million.
2 million a year. That's not a country. That's a war zone.
It is a war zone. That's the point. In a stateless society, every man is a soldier. You have to be. There is no police force to call. There is no one else to protect you or your family.
And it wasn't just in Europe either. You mentioned Kennewick Man. He was found in Washington State.
9,400 years old. One of the oldest skeletons found in North America. And what did they find? A stone projectile point lodged in his pelvis. Even 9,000 years ago, on a totally different continent, humans were shooting each other with projectiles. The deeper we dig, the more we find that Hobbes was right. The state of nature was a state of war.
And let's not forget Lindo Man, found in a peat bog in England. This brings us a bit closer in time, about 2,000 years ago. And his death wasn't just a battle death. This was something else entirely.
Lindo Man represents the casual cruelty of the past. It's what forensic scientists call overkill. He wasn't just killed.
Yeah.
He was bludgeoned with an axe, cracking his skull. He was strangled with a cord made of animal sinew, and his throat was cut. It was almost certainly a ritual sacrifice. It suggests that violence wasn't just a practical necessity of war. It was woven deep into the religious and cultural fabric of life.
So the bones tell one story, a really grim one.
Yeah.
But Pinker also spends a lot of time analyzing ancient literature to see if the written record matches the forensic one.
Mm.
He starts with one of the pillars of Western lit, Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Right, which we usually teach in high school as these glorious heroic tales, the honor of Achilles, the cleverness of Odysseus. We treat them as high art, which they are, but
But when you actually read them, you take off those rose-colored glasses, the Iliad reads like a slasher film.
it really does. Pinker points out that we tend to gloss over the gore, but Homer was absolutely obsessed with it. He doesn't just say, and then he died. He gives you the play-by-play. He writes about brains spewing from the wound and spattering the inside of the helmet.
I remember the line about the spear going through the jaw and the tongue, and the guy bites down on the cold bronze.
Yes. Or eyeballs being knocked out of their sockets and rolling in the dust. It's incredibly visceral. Homer revels in the anatomy of injury.
But it's more than just the gore. It's the morality that feels so alien. We talk about the code of honor of the ancient Greeks, but that code seems to permit and even encourage things we would classify as the worst kind of war crimes today.
Permit is too soft a word. It celebrated them. I mean, look at the treatment of women. The entire Trojan War, this whole 10-year heroic epic, is sparked because two warlords, Agamemnon and Achilles, are having a public squabble over who gets to keep a captured sex slave. Precise. She isn't a character with agency. She's loot. She's a trophy, like a bronze tripod. And that was the standard operating procedure. In Homeric Greece, rape wasn't a war crime. It was a perk of victory. It was expected. If you conquered a city, you killed the men and you took the women as property. That was the explicit goal.
There's that chilling speech by Agamemnon.
Oh, yes. He's scolding his brother Menelaus for considering showing mercy to a captured Trojan warrior. He says, and this is a direct quote, "We are not going to leave a single one of them alive, not a single one, down to the babies in their mothers' wombs."
He is explicitly, unambiguously calling for total genocide.
Total genocide. And the text, the poet, treats this as the correct and honorable moral stance. That's the foreign country we're talking about. It's not just that violence happened. It's that there was often no moral framework to even say that it was wrong.
Which brings us to the other great pillar of Western civilization, the Bible.
The good book.
And Pinker does this deep dive into the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. And the body count is just staggering. I mean, just look at the very first family in Genesis.
Cain and Abel.
We think of it as a parable, a story about jealousy. But if you look at it statistically, think about it. The world population is 4 people. Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. One murder occurs.
That's a homicide rate of 25%.
25%.
Which, to be fair, is a bit of a statistical joke, but it points to a deeper truth. The early books of the Bible depict a society where the solution to almost every problem is violence and death.
The death penalty was prescribed for, well, everything. Working on the Sabbath, cursing your parents, adultery, homosexuality.
Picking up sticks on the Sabbath.
Right. And it wasn't just individual violence commanded by law, but divine violence on a massive scale. The flood is a global genocide. Sodom and Gomorrah is essentially the divine napalming of a civilian population.
And Pinker's point here isn't to bash religion, is it?
No, it's not theological, it's anthropological.
Exactly. His point is that these stories were written by people who lived in a very violent world where life was incredibly cheap. They projected their own violent reality onto their god. If you live in a world where neighboring tribes are constantly trying to wipe you out, you don't imagine a pacifist turn the other cheek god. You imagine a warrior god who will wipe them out first.
Okay, so we've established the baseline. It's a pretty grim picture. Whether it's Ötzi bleeding out on a glacier, Agamemnon ordering the slaughter of infants, or the harsh justice of the Old Testament, the past was a place where violence was the default setting.
It was the primary tool in the toolbox for conflict resolution.
So the trillion-dollar question is, how did we get from there to here? How did we go from a world where you kill your neighbor for stealing your goat to a world where we get genuinely outraged if a barista puts the wrong kind of milk in our latte?
Pinker identifies 6 major historical trends, 6 massive overlapping waves that gradually, systematically push that curve of violence down.
Let's start with the first one. It's arguably the most important. Trend number 1, the pacification process.
This is the big one. It's the transition from anarchy to statehood. We're talking about the move from hunter-gatherer tribes to the first agricultural civilizations, starting roughly 5,000 years ago in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt.
And to understand why this was so revolutionary for peace, we have to understand the game theory of anarchy, what Pinker calls the Hobbesian trap.
Right. from the philosopher Thomas Hobbes in his book Leviathan. He famously described life in the state of nature as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And the evidence suggests he was absolutely right.
So walk us through the trap. Why does a lack of government inevitably lead to so much violence? Most people listening probably think, well, I'm a nice person. I wouldn't just go out and kill my neighbor.
You might be a nice person, but the question is, do you know for a fact that your neighbor is a nice person?
I'm pretty sure.
But pretty sure isn't good enough when the stakes are life and death. In a state of anarchy, there are no police to call. There's no 911. If your neighbor decides he wants your food, he can just take it. If he kills you, you're dead. And there are no consequences for him. So you have what's called a security dilemma.
A loop of paranoia.
It's a loop of paranoia. Even if you are a committed pacifist, you have to worry that he might strike you. And he, even if he's a pacifist, is worrying that you might strike him. It becomes a game of, I think that he thinks that I might attack him, so he's probably planning to attack me first to be safe, so I better attack him first to be safe.
It makes a preemptive strike the only rational choice.
Exactly. It's a mathematical track. You strike not out of aggression, but out of fear.
So how do you break the trap? How do you escape?
You introduce a third party with overwhelming force, the Leviathan.
A state? A king? A government? Something with a monopoly on the legitimate use of force.
Precisely. You and your neighbor both agree to give up your right to private violence, and you outsource your defense and your retribution to the king. Now, if you steal my goat, I don't have to gather my kin and burn your house down.
Which would then cause your kin to attack my kin, and on and on.
And on forever. Instead, I go to the king, or the king's agent, and the king punishes you. The cycle is broken.
And the data shows this works almost instantly, right? I mean, even if the king is a brutal tyrant.
That's the really counterintuitive part. We tend to think of the first kings and emperors as these bloody, awful tyrants, and they often were. But Pinker shows that as soon as a territory is brought under the control of a central government, the rate of violent death among the populace drops by about fivefold.
Fivefold. Even under a dictator like Genghis Khan.
Yes, because even the most selfish dictator has no interest in his subjects killing each other off. A dead peasant pays no taxes. A dead peasant can't be conscripted into the army. A dead peasant grows no crops. The Leviathan wants to be the only one doing the killing, so he brutally suppresses all the freelance violence, the tribal feuds, the revenge cycles, the banditry.
So the very first big step toward peace wasn't moral progress. It wasn't that we became better people. It was just management.
It was crowd control. It was a protection racket, essentially. But it laid the foundation for everything that followed. Once you aren't worried about being murdered in your sleep every single night, you can start building cities, developing trade networks, and eventually universities and philosophies.
Which leads us perfectly into trend number 2.
Yeah.
And this is my personal favorite because it involves the history of table manners. This is the civilizing process.
This takes us from antiquity into the Middle Ages and early modern period in Europe. And for this insight, we really have to thank a sociologist named Norbert Elias.
Elias did something brilliant. He studied something that most historians at the time completely ignored: etiquette books.
Right. These were basically training manuals for the nobility, teaching them how to behave in court. And when you read these books from the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, the rules are just, they're shocking.
Give us some examples. This stuff is amazing.
I mean, you have rules like, do not blow your nose in the tablecloth, or do not urinate in the hallway or on the staircase.
The rule that needed to be written down.
A rule that needed to be written. When you see a piece of meat on the communal platter, do not grab it with your bare hands and gnaw on it like an animal. And my favorite, do not attack your dining companion with your knife.
It sounds like they were speaking to toddlers. But these were books for adult aristocrats, for knights.
Exactly. And what that tells us is something profound about the psychology of the medieval knight. They were incredibly impulsive. They had very little emotional regulation or self-control. If they felt an urge to pee, to spit, to get angry, to stab, they just did it.
So Elias's argument is that manners weren't just about being polite or sophisticated. They were a neurological workout.
Yes. It was the painstaking construction of the superego, as we're going to call it. Society, starting from the top down and the royal courts, began demanding that people inhibit their impulses. You have to wait for the food to be passed to you. You have to control your bodily functions until you can find a private place. You have to control your temper.
And you have that great example of the knife.
The table knife. It's the perfect symbol for the whole process. In the Middle Ages, everyone carried a dagger at all times. It was their multi-tool. It It was a weapon, and it was a utensil. You'd use it to spear a piece of meat from the platter, and if an argument broke out at the table, you'd use it to stab your friend.
Very efficient.
But as this civilizing process took hold over the centuries, the rules around the knife changed. First, you were forbidden from pointing the sharp end at someone. Then you had to hold it in a specific, non-threatening way. And eventually, the physical object itself changed. The tip was rounded off.
It literally became a butter knife.
It was transformed from a weapon of war into a tool of dining. And that physical change mirrored the psychological change happening inside people's heads. We were dulling our sharp, impulsive edges. We were moving from a culture of honor where every single insult must be answered with violence to a culture of dignity where we rely on internal self-control.
And the stats back this up. This had a real effect on violence.
Overwhelmingly. The data on homicide rates in Europe is some of the best historical data we have. And between the Middle Ages and the early 20th century, the homicide rate dropped by a factor of 10 to 50.
A factor of 50.
In some places, like England, it went from an estimated 100 murders per 100,000 people per year down to about 1. That is a 99% reduction in interpersonal violence, driven largely by this psychological shift towards self-restraint.
Okay, that self-restraint only stops you from killing people you happen to get angry with at dinner. It doesn't stop you from killing people you think are supposed to die, like witches or heretics or slaves.
That's a different problem. That requires a different kind of psychological shift. That requires the humanitarian revolution. This is trend number 3.
And now we're in the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, the 17th and 18th centuries.
And this is one of the most astonishing and frankly compressed moments in human history. In a very short window of time, maybe 150 years, humanity suddenly decided to stop doing a bunch of horrible things it had been doing for millennia.
It was like a cascade of abolition movements.
Exactly. We abolished judicial torture. No more breaking people on the wheel, no more drawing and quartering. We abolished witch hunts and other forms of superstitious killing. We abolished debtors' prisons and dueling. And most importantly, we began the process of abolishing slavery and the slave trade.
So what on earth triggered this? Did human brains just suddenly get nicer?
Picker points to a few key drivers, but a big one is, surprisingly, technology. Specifically, the printing press and the explosion of literacy that followed.
So books saved the world.
In a very specific way. It wasn't just any books, it was the rise of the novel, and particularly the epistolary novel, novels written as a series of letters.
Like Pamela or Clarissa.
Exactly. Those were the blockbusters of their day, and they were often written from the perspective of a character who was in a vulnerable position, a young woman, a servant, someone being oppressed.
So when you read these, you're not just watching a story from the outside, you are forced to inhabit someone else's mind.
Precisely. Reading is a technology for empathy. It is an empathy workout. It forces you to simulate the consciousness of another person. You feel their fear, their humiliation, their hope, their suffering, as if it were your own.
And once you spend a few hundred pages living inside someone's head, it becomes a lot harder to rationalize tying them to a stake and lighting a fire.
It becomes much harder. It expands your moral circle. You start to see that other people of different classes, races, genders, have an inner life that is just as rich and vivid and important as your own. And once you see that, you can't treat them like objects or animals anymore.
Okay, this brings us into the 20th century. And this is where the argument usually faces its biggest, most emotional resistance. Trend number 4. The long peace.
The post-World War II era.
I have to play devil's advocate here. I mean, come on. The 20th century, we had 2 world wars, the Holocaust, the gulags, the atomic bomb. How can Pinker possibly argue that the 20th century contributes to a decline in violence? It seems like the opposite.
It is the ultimate counter-argument, and he spends a lot of time on it. First, he crunches the numbers. Even with the horrific spikes of the world wars, the rate of death, the percentage of the world population killed in war was still lower than in many pre-state tribal societies.
That's a hard pill to swallow.
It is. But the term the long peace refers specifically to what happened after 1945.
Which is nothing.
Well, not nothing, but something very specific and historically unprecedented. 0 wars between the great powers.
That is a very specific definition. The great powers.
It's a crucial one. For centuries, the history of Europe was the history of the great powers. France, England, Germany, Russia, Spain, being constantly at war with each other. It was the natural state of affairs. Since 1945, the major developed powers, the US, Russia, China, the nations of Western Europe, Japan, have not fought a direct war against each other.
We had the Cold War. We had tons of proxy wars,
Mhm.
Vietnam, Korea,
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
Absolutely. The long peace wasn't a perfect peace, but we didn't have World War III. And if you look at the historical patterns, that is a miracle. It defied all prediction.
Well, why? What happened? Was it just the nuclear deterrent? The fear of mutual assured destruction?
That's certainly a huge part of it. The cost of all-out war between great powers became infinite, but Pinker argues it's also a fundamental shift in values. We stopped seeing war as glorious, and maybe most importantly, we stopped seeing the conquest of territory as a legitimate goal of statecraft.
This brings up that weird analogy he borrows from Moby Dick, the fast fish, loose fish concept.
Right. It's a strange but perfect analogy. In 19th century whaling, a fast fish is a whale that is already hooked or tied to a boat. It belongs to that boat. A loose fish is any whale swimming freely, and it's fair game for anyone to hunt.
So historically, territories were loose fish.
Exactly. Poland was a loose fish. If you were a powerful country like Russia or Prussia and you thought you could conquer Poland, you just did it. And the other countries might not like it, but they accepted it as part of the game.
And now?
Now, national borders are fast fish. They are considered inviolable. If a country invades another to annex its territory, like when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the entire international community freaks out. It's seen as fundamentally illegitimate. That's a massive change.
Which carries us right into Trend 5, the new peace. This is the post-Cold War era, from 1989 to today.
After the Berlin Wall fell, a lot of experts predicted total chaos, and we did see horrific conflicts like in the Balkans and Rwanda. There was a lot of pessimism in the 90s.
But the overall data tells a different story.
A radically different story. Since 1989, organized conflicts of all kinds, interstate wars, civil wars, genocides, have all declined dramatically. The chance of dying in a war is lower now than at almost any point in recorded history.
And Pinker gives a lot of credit to an organization that we usually love to mock, the United Nations.
The poor UN. We only ever hear about their failures, like in Srebrenica.
Yeah.
But the political scientists who actually study this stuff have found that statistically, when UN peacekeepers are deployed to a conflict zone, they work.
They actually keep the peace.
They do. They significantly reduce the chance of a conflict restarting. They basically act as a referee. They separate the combatants and provide a face-saving exit for leaders who want to stop fighting but don't want to look weak. They are the global version of the police officer separating two guys in a bar fight.
And that brings us to the final trend. Trend 6, the one we are living through right now. The rights revolutions.
Yes, the post-war cascade. This is civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, children's rights, and even animal rights.
Pinker uses this amazing tool, the Google Enneagram Viewer, to visualize this. It searches millions of books published over the centuries for the frequency of words. And you see these terms like children's rights or animal rights, and they basically don't exist before the mid-20th century. And then they just explode. The line goes almost vertical.
Let's just take children's rights. It is truly hard for us to comprehend how much the status of a child has changed. Historically, in many cultures, children were effectively the property of their parents. Infanticide was common. If you had a baby you couldn't afford, or one that was female, you might just leave it in the woods. Exposure, it was called.
And beating children was just standard parenting. Spare the rod and spoil the child.
It was considered a moral duty to beat obedience into them. But in just a few generations, we went from children should be seen and not heard to, helicopter parenting and putting safety warnings on everything.
You mentioned the Sesame Street example earlier.
It's my favorite example. When they released the DVDs of the old school Sesame Street episodes from the 70s, they had to put a warning label on the box.
A warning for adults, right?
For adults. It said something like, these early episodes are intended for adults and may not suit the needs of today's preschool child. Because the puppets were doing dangerous things, like riding a bike without a helmet, or Cookie Monster was eating cookies too fast, which might encourage childhood obesity.
That sounds completely ridiculous, but it shows how incredibly high our bar for safety and well-being has risen.
It shows that we now view children as these incredibly precious and vulnerable beings that must be protected from every conceivable harm. That is a radically new psychological baseline for a society.
And then there's animal rights. This might be the final frontier of the expanding moral circle.
If you want to feel the foreignness of the past, consider this. In 16th century Paris, a very popular form of public entertainment for festivals was cat burning.
Dot burning.
They would host a sack or a cage full of live cats over a bonfire, and the crowd would cheer and laugh as the animals shrieked and burned to death. This was considered good, clean fun for the whole family.
That's just nauseating.
It is. But today, if a person did that, they would be arrested and become a social pariah, universally reviled. We have laws against animal cruelty. We have the "no animals were harmed" disclaimer in movie credits. We have a massive cultural shift toward vegetarianism and veganism.
So we have these 6 massive trends pushing violence down. But the question remains, why? Are we biologically different people from the ones who burn cats for fun?
No, that's the crucial thing. Our hardware, our brains, are exactly the same as Ötzi the Iceman's. If you cloned Ötzi and raised him in a modern suburb, he'd probably be playing video games and recycling his plastics, just like the rest of us.
So it's not the hardware, it's the software that's running on it.
Exactly. It's about which programs are running. It's about how we manage our inner demons. Pinker identifies 5 specific psychological systems or modules in the brain that predispose us to violence.
And before he gets into them, he starts by debunking a very popular idea about violence, the hydraulic theory.
Yes, the Freudian idea. The idea that violence is a drive, like hunger or thirst. That we have this thirst for blood or aggressive energy that builds up over time and must be released or else will explode.
Like the premise of the movie The Purge. We have to have this one night of violence to vent our aggression.
Right. And from a modern scientific perspective, that is complete nonsense. Violence isn't a fluid that builds up. It's a tactic. It's a tool. It's a button the brain can push to solve a specific problem. If you don't have the problem, you don't have the urge to push the button.
So let's meet the demons. The different reasons the brain might push that button. Demon number 1, predatory or instrumental violence.
This is the simplest. It's cold, calculated violence as a means to an end. I want your wallet. You are holding the wallet. I will hit you in the head to get the wallet. It's not personal. There's no anger. It's just business.
Demon number 2, dominance. This seems like a really big one, especially for males.
It's huge. This is the primal urge for status, for prestige, for being the alpha. It's the motivation to not be dissed or disrespected. It's about glory and honor.
Pinker tells that story about the Nova Scotia Christmas tree that illustrates this perfectly on a national level.
It's a great little story. Every year since 1917, the province of Nova Scotia sends a giant Christmas tree to the city of Boston to thank them for the help they sent after a massive explosion devastated Halifax. It's this lovely, benign, peaceful expression of national pride.
But that same instinct for pride has a very dark side.
It can flip instantly into jingoism. My country is better than your country, and I will fight a war to prove it. Dominance is why wars start over insults or why street gangs fight over who controls which corner. It's all about status.
Demon number 3, revenge.
The moralistic urge to punish wrongdoers. And the key psychological mechanism here, which fuels cycles of revenge, is what Pinker calls the moralization gap.
Unpack that for us. What's the gap?
It's the difference in the narrative between the victim and the perpetrator of a harmful act. If I bump into you and knock your coffee over, I'll probably say, "Oh, sorry, man, it was an accident. I was in a hurry. Let's just move on." I minimize the harm. But you, the victim, you might see it differently. You might say, "That was a brutal, unprovoked, and disrespectful assault on my dignity. That was an expensive coffee. This is a historic injustice that cannot be forgotten."
So the victim always feels the pain more intensely and sees the act as more immoral than the perpetrator does.
Exactly. And because of that gap, when the victim retaliates, their act of justice always feels like a wild overreaction, an unfair escalation to the original guy. So he feels he has to hit back even harder. It fuels the vendetta cycle, potentially forever.
Demon number 4, sadism.
This is taking genuine pleasure in the suffering of another being. This is your classic horror movie villain. But interestingly, Pinker argues that pure sadism is actually the rarest of the demons. Most people are not sadists. It's a genuine pathology.
Which leads us to the biggest killer of them all, the one that has caused the most death in history. Demon number 5, ideology.
This is, without a doubt, the most dangerous one because it can recruit our good motives. It hijacks our desire for justice and a better world.
This is utopianism.
It's utopianism. If you believe with absolute certainty that you have the blueprint for a perfect world, a utopia, a master race, a classless workers' paradise, the kingdom of God on earth, then any amount of violence you commit to achieve that infinite good is justified.
It's the old "you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs" argument.
That is the slogan of every single genocidal regime in history. But as George Orwell once asked, where is the omelet? Usually you just end up with a lot of broken eggs. Ideology allows good, normal people to do the most terrible things because it frames violence not as a sin, but as a moral duty. It bypasses our natural empathy.
So if we have these 5 demons lurking in our source code ready to go, what holds them back? What are the better angels of our nature?
Pinker identifies 4 psychological faculties, 4 mental muscles, really, that we can strengthen to suppress the demons and promote peace.
Angel number 1, empathy. We touched on this with the rise of the novel.
Right, the ability to feel the pain and joy of others. But Pinker is careful to warn us. Empathy on its own is fragile. It's biased. We naturally feel empathy for cute things, for our family, and for people who look and think like us.
He mentions the experiment with the rats and the plexiglass cage.
It's an amazing study. Even rats seem to have a primitive form of empathy. If you train a rat to press a lever for a tasty food pellet, but then you rig it so that pressing the lever also delivers an electric shock to another rat in the next cage,
What happens?
the first rat will stop pressing the lever. It will literally starve itself to avoid causing pain to the other rat.
That's incredible.
It is. But the great human challenge is expanding that circle of empathy beyond the rat in the next cage to include people on the other side of the world, people from different tribes.
Angel number 2, self-control.
This is the angel that directly counters demons like dominance and revenge. It's the frontal lobe ant, the planner, versus the limbic grasshopper, the impulsive part of our brain. It's the battle between our immediate urges and our long-term goals.
And we have to talk about the famous marshmallow test.
The classic experiment. You put a marshmallow in front of a 4-year-old kid. You tell them, I'm leaving the room for 15 minutes. If you don't eat this marshmallow while I'm gone, you'll get a second one when I come back.
And some kids eat it right away, others manage to wait.
And what's amazing is that when they track these kids for decades, the ones who were able to wait, the ones with higher self-control at age 4, did better in almost every area of life. They had higher SAT scores, lower BMI, lower rates of drug addiction, and criminal conviction.
And then there's a radish experiment that shows willpower is like a muscle.
This one demonstrates ego depletion. You bring hungry college students into a lab room that smells of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies. On the table, there's a bowl of those cookies and a bowl of raw radishes. You tell one group you can eat the cookies. You tell the other you can only eat the radishes.
That is just cruel.
It is psychological torture. The radish eaters have to use all their willpower to resist the cookies. Then, after that, you give both groups a very difficult, unsolvable puzzle to work on. The cookie eaters, they try for about 19 minutes before giving up.
And the radish eaters?
They give up in 8 minutes.
Because their willpower muscle was completely exhausted from fighting the cookies.
Exactly. Willpower is a finite resource. And this helps explain why so much violence happens when people are tired, stressed, drunk, or hungry. But civilization itself acts as an external frontal lobe. Laws, manners, social norms, they take the load off our individual willpower. We don't have to decide not to kill our annoying neighbor every single day. The law has already decided for us.
Angel number 3, the moral sense.
This is our intuitive sense of right and wrong, of fairness and justice. But as we discussed with the demon of ideology, the moral sense can be dangerous if it's purely tribal. We need a moral sense that values universal principles like fairness and individual autonomy over just loyalty to the in-group.
And finally, angel number 4, reason, the escalator of reason.
This is maybe the most controversial one. Does being smarter actually make us nicer?
Yeah, the evil genius trope in movies suggests otherwise.
It does. But statistically, Pinker argues yes. There's a well-documented phenomenon called the Flynn effect. IQ scores have been rising massively, about 3 points per decade, all throughout the 20th century. We are getting better and better at abstract reasoning.
So how does abstract reasoning help create peace?
It allows us to detach from our own immediate emotional parochial perspective. It allows us to apply principles like the Golden Rule universally. You can use logic to say, wait a minute, if I don't want to be a slave and there is no logical biological difference between me and a person with different skin color, then it is illogical for him to be a slave either. Reason allows us to stand outside our own traditions and critique them. It helps us reframe violence not as a contest to be won, but as a problem to be solved.
So we have the 6 trends, the 5 demons, and the 4 angels. To tie it all together, Pinker lists 5 major historical forces that acted as the engine for this whole process, pushing the angels to win out over the demons.
Right. We've touched on all of them, but it helps to synthesize. First, as we said, the Leviathan, the rise of the state with its monopoly on force, which breaks the Hobbesian trap.
Second, gentle commerce.
The old Enlightenment idea: make money, not war. Trade is a positive-sum game, unlike conquest, which is zero-sum. If I'm trading with you, you are worth more to me alive and prosperous than you are dead. Globalization, for all its problems, is a massive force for peace because it creates this web of mutual dependency.
Third, feminization.
This one is crucial and often overlooked. Violence is an overwhelmingly male phenomenon. Testosterone is a hell of a drug. Men commit something like 90% of all homicides.
So as women gain power in a society, the society becomes less violent.
The data strongly suggests so. As societies empower women, as women enter government, business, and academia, the culture itself shifts. We move away from the values of manly honor and glory-seeking and toward values of compromise, safety, and well-being. We moved from the homosocial worlds of the past, all-male armies, monasteries, pirate ships, to integrated mixed-gender worlds. And the overall temperature of violence cooled down.
Fourth, what you just mentioned, the escalator of reason.
We just know more than we used to. We've accumulated knowledge. We learned through science that burning witches doesn't actually stop crop failures. We learned through psychology that beating children creates damaged, violent adults. We are using our collective brains to optimize for human flourishing in a way we never could before.
And the fifth and final force.
Cosmopolitanism, the combined effect of literacy, mobility, and mass media. The ability to travel, to read novels, to watch documentaries, to interact with people and ideas from all over the world. It breaks down tribalism and expands that circle of empathy we talked about.
So this brings us to the end. And the big question. If we are living in the most peaceful time in history, is it guaranteed to stay that way?
Absolutely not. And Pinker is very, very clear about this. This is not a prophecy. It's not some law of history that says things must always get better. It's just a tracking of trends. We don't have a peace force field around us.
We could backslide. All these gains could be reversed.
We could. If we abandon reason and Enlightenment values, if we dismantle global trade and retreat into nationalism, if we let a new utopian ideology take over, all the demons are still there, waiting.
And there are new threats that Pinker acknowledges. Climate change could create resource scarcity and conflict. Nuclear terrorism is a constant worry.
And there's the black swan problem. War, he shows, follows a power law distribution. That means most wars are small, but there is a thick tail on the graph. A civilization-ending mega-war is statistically unlikely, but it's not impossible. We could still have a conflict that wipes out all these incredible gains in a heartbeat.
That's a very sobering thought. But I want to end on the note that Pinker himself strikes at the end of the book.
Which is gratitude.
Yeah. How does knowing all of this change your Monday morning?
It reframes everything. It makes you realize we are the lucky ones. We won the lottery of history by being born now and not in some other century. We aren't being conscripted into the trenches. We aren't worried about being burned at the stake for heresy.
And it's also empowering, isn't it?
It is. Violence didn't decline by magic or some mysterious historical force. It declined because men and women in the past were appalled by the violence they saw around them, and they worked to end it. They built the Leviathan, they wrote the empathetic novels, they invented democracy. They marched for rights.
So we aren't just passive observers watching a graph go down. We are the active participants who are pushing it down.
Exactly. Promoting literacy, promoting trade, defending human rights, using reason over dogma. These are not just nice things to do. These are active peacekeeping missions that we can all participate in. We can consciously choose to listen to our better angels.
Violence has declined because men and women in the past were appalled by it and worked to end it. We can do the same. I think that's the thought to leave you with.
And maybe, just maybe, be a little kinder to the person who cuts you off in traffic today. Don't let that inner demon of dominance and revenge take the wheel.
Use that frontal lobe ant. Resist the marshmallow.
Exactly.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. It's a massive book, but the message it carries is even bigger.
A pleasure, as always.
Check your demons, exercise your angels. We'll see you next time.